The digital readout flashed new data across my screen as I adjusted the gain on our forward-facing sonar array. The numbers kept changing as we descended deeper into the Marianas Trench, each meter taking us further than almost anyone had gone before. "How's it looking, Larry?" Mary called from the pilot station, her fingers dancing across the submersible's control interface. "Depth is 9,843 meters and still dropping," I answered, keeping my eyes fixed on the readings. "Pressure hull is holding steady. No anomalies in the structural integrity monitors." I couldn't help but smile as I watched the depth counter tick steadily downward. 5 years. 5 years of grant applications, rejected proposals, equipment tests, and endless meetings with potential investors. 5 years of my life spent convincing people that this expedition wasn't just worthwhile, but necessary. Now we were finally here, in our custom-built research submersible, the Oceanus, probing depths that only 2 other manned vessels had ever reached. The cabin of the Oceanus was tight but efficiently designed. 6 of us were crammed into a space roughly the size of a minivan, surrounded by banks of equipment and monitors. The faint hum of the life support systems provided a constant backdrop to our work, punctuated by the occasional ping of the sonar. "Hull temperature holding at 4.2 degrees Celsius, Jose reported from his station. "Power consumption is nominal." I nodded, glancing at the external camera feeds showing nothing but an endless blue-black void. At this depth, no natural light penetrated. Our powerful external lights cut through maybe 15 meters of water before being swallowed by the darkness. "Approaching target depth in approximately 7 minutes, Mary announced, her voice steady and professional. She'd been my first choice for this expedition, not just because she was one of the best deep-sea pilots in the world, but because I knew she wouldn't panic if things went wrong. And at these depths, things could go catastrophically wrong in seconds. "All science stations, prepare for data collection," I said. "Brenda, is the sample collection system ready?" "Green across the board," Brenda replied from her station. "Manipulator arms are responding perfectly." "Manuel, how's our comms with the surface?" "We're maintaining connection through the relay buoys," Manuel said, adjusting something on his console. "Signal strength is better than expected. We should be able to transmit real-time data once we begin collection." I checked my watch, a habit more than a necessity since every screen around me displayed the time. We were making good progress, slightly ahead of schedule. If everything continued according to plan, we'd have 4 hours at our target depth before beginning our ascent. "All systems check complete," Rachel called out. "Environmental sensors are calibrated and recording." I felt a surge of anticipation as Mary announced, "Approaching target depth, 9,900 meters and 10,000 meters. We've reached our primary research depth." This was it. The moment we'd been working toward for half a decade. The Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in Earth's oceans, stretched out around us, largely unexplored and filled with potential discoveries. "Beginning our survey pattern," Mary said, easing the submersible into a gentle turn. "Larry, you've got the high-res sonar whenever you're ready." I took a deep breath and activated the high-resolution sonar equipment, cutting-edge technology that had cost nearly a quarter of our expedition budget. The standard sonar gave us a rough picture of the sea floor, but this system could detect changes in density and composition, potentially revealing structures or anomalies hidden beneath the sediment. "Starting the mapping sequence now," I said, watching as the first detailed readings began to appear on my screen. The seafloor slowly took shape in false color, blues and greens representing the soft sediment, yellows and reds showing harder materials. We'd been scanning for less than 10 minutes when I noticed it, an unusual pattern in the data that didn't match the surrounding topography. "Mary, I'm seeing something interesting here," I said, leaning closer to my screen. "Can you bring us around to heading 072? "Changing course now," Mary replied, smoothly adjusting our direction. The anomaly became clearer as we approached. A strange discontinuity in the seafloor structure, almost like a shadow beneath the sediment layer. "Are you getting this, Rachel?" I asked, sending the sonar data to her station. "Yes, I see it," she said, the excitement in her voice matching my own. "That's definitely not a natural formation, at least not one we've documented before." I studied the readings more carefully. It looks like there's a large cavity or chamber beneath that sediment layer. The density readings suggest it's hollow, or at least filled with something other than solid rock or sediment. "How big are we talking?" Jose asked, leaving his station to look over my shoulder. "Based on these readings, maybe 50 meters across," I said. "And it seems to extend downward at an angle." "Could it be a lava tube?" Brenda suggested. "This region has volcanic activity." I shook my head. The structure doesn't match known volcanic formations. This is something else. Mary brought us closer to the anomaly, moving with the careful precision that had made her reputation as a pilot. The external lights now illuminated the sea floor directly beneath us, a vast expanse of pale sediment occasionally broken by small rock formations. "I want to get a visual," I decided. "Mary, can you bring us down to about 5 meters above that section?" "On it," she replied, gradually decreasing our altitude above the seafloor. I moved to the observation window, a reinforced porthole that allowed direct visual confirmation of what our instruments were telling us. The powerful lights mounted on the Oceanus exterior cut through the darkness, illuminating particles floating in the water and the ghostly terrain below. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the expected sediment covering the trench floor. But as Mary positioned us directly over the anomaly, I noticed subtle differences in the seafloor texture. There was a slight depression, barely noticeable, and the sediment seemed to form a different pattern than the surrounding area. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, mostly to myself. "The sonar clearly shows a large cavity, but visually it's almost completely hidden. Could be covered by a thin layer of sediment that's built up over time," Rachel suggested, joining me at the window. "Maybe," I agreed. "If that's the case, whatever this structure is, it's been here for a very long time." I was about to request that we deploy one of our sampling probes when I felt it, a slight vibration running through the submersible's frame. At first I thought it might be a problem with our engines, but Mary's concerned expression told me it wasn't coming from the Oceanus. "Did you feel that?" I asked. Before anyone could answer, a second tremor hit, stronger this time, enough to make the equipment rattle. "Seismic activity," Manuel called out, checking his instruments. "Nothing on the warning system, though." "Mary, back us off," I said, suddenly uneasy. "Let's put some distance between us and—" The third tremor cut me off, violent enough to throw me against the wall. Warning alarms began blaring throughout the cabin. "Multiple system alerts," Jose shouted over the noise. "External pressure fluctuating." I stumbled back to the observation window just in time to witness something I'd never seen before. The seafloor directly beneath us seemed to ripple, like fabric caught in a breeze. The subtle depression we'd noticed earlier began to widen, sediment sliding away as if being pulled into a drain. "It's collapsing," I yelled, watching in horror as the ocean floor beneath us literally fell away, creating a massive sinkhole. "Mary, full power! Get us out of here!" Mary's hands flew across the controls, but I could tell from the strain on the engines that we were already being pulled downward by the sudden current created by the collapse. "Hang on!" she shouted, fighting the controls. The Oceanus tilted sharply as one side of the sinkhole gave way completely. Through the observation window, I watched as an enormous cavity opened beneath us. Not the relatively small chamber our sonar had detected, but something much larger. A vast darkness that seemed to extend indefinitely downward. "Everyone brace yourselves," I shouted, grabbing onto the nearest secure handhold. "Emergency protocols. Secure all stations." The submersible lurched sickeningly as it was caught in the powerful current. Our external lights swept wildly across the collapsing seafloor, creating a disorienting strobe effect. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something solid flash by in the darkness below, something that didn't look like natural rock formation. But before I could process what I'd seen, we were in free fall. The Oceanus tumbled through the void, its emergency systems blaring as we spun out of control. Equipment tore loose from insufficiently secured moorings. Someone screamed. I couldn't tell who over the cacophony of alarms and the groaning of the submersible's hull under stress. "Cut the engines!" I yelled to Mary, seeing that our propulsion was only making the spin worse. "Let the stabilizers work!" She complied immediately, silencing the main thrusters. For a moment, it seemed to help as the Oceanus's automatic stabilization system fought to correct our orientation. Then came the impact. We hit something solid, and hit it hard. My head snapped forward, then back, slamming against the metal frame behind me. A bright flash of pain exploded behind my eyes, and the chaotic sounds of the cabin began to fade almost immediately. My last conscious thought was that we'd found something significant after all, just not in the way we'd planned. Then darkness swallowed everything. Pain pulled me back to consciousness. Dull, throbbing pain centered at the back of my skull. I tried to open my eyes, but immediately shut them against the harsh red emergency lights bathing the cabin. My face felt wet. I touched my forehead, and my fingers came away dark with blood. I was sprawled awkwardly across the control panel, instruments digging into my chest and stomach. The taste of copper filled my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue during the impact. I pushed myself up slowly, fighting a wave of nausea as the cabin seemed to tilt around me. "Everyone okay?" I called out, my voice raspy. "Sound off." The cabin was a disaster zone. Equipment torn from mounts, screens cracked and sparking, emergency lights casting everything in an eerie red glow. The normal hum of life support systems had been replaced by the piercing wail of multiple alarms and the hiss of escaping air from somewhere I couldn't immediately locate. I wiped blood from my eyes and did a quick head count. Mary was still strapped into the pilot's seat, working frantically at controls that sparked and fizzed. Rachel was pulling herself up from the floor near her station, a nasty bruise already forming on her cheek. Brenda was checking the science equipment, moving with a slight limp. Manuel sat hunched at the communications array, blood streaming from a cut on his scalp. "Where's Jose?" I asked, my voice growing stronger. A groan from the rear of the cabin answered me. I turned and saw him pinned beneath a section of equipment storage that had torn free during our crash. The heavy metal frame had him trapped from the waist down. "Jose." I stumbled toward him, my legs unsteady beneath me. As I got closer, I could see his face twisted in pain, skin pale and clammy. "Don't move. We'll get you out." "My leg," he gasped. "It's bad, Larry. Really bad." I crouched beside him and assessed the situation. The storage unit had him pinned against the bulkhead. I could see where his right leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. Definitely broken. "Brenda, I need help here," I called. "Manuel, check communications. Mary, what's our situation?" As Brenda made her way over, I tried to gauge how much the storage unit weighed. It would take at least 2 of us to shift it without causing Jose more injury. "Communications are completely down," Manuel reported, pressing buttons frantically. "All relay buoys are offline. I can't even get a basic ping." Mary's voice was tight with stress. "Multiple hull breaches detected. Life support is running on emergency power. Environmental controls are failing. But Larry, there's something else. Something impossible. Let's deal with Jose first, I said, motioning Brenda closer. On 3, we lift straight up. Ready? 1, 2, 3. We strained against the metal frame, muscles burning with the effort. Jose screamed as the pressure shifted, but we managed to raise it enough for Rachel to help pull him free. The sight of his leg turned my stomach. Bone had broken through skin, and blood pooled beneath him. Pressure bandage, I ordered, and Rachel quickly pulled the emergency medical kit from its wall mount. Manuel, help us get him stabilized. Together, we worked to splint Jose's leg and control the bleeding. His face was gray with pain and shock, but he remained conscious. Thanks, he whispered as we finished securing the bandage. Not how I planned to end this trip. Mary, I said, turning back to our pilot. What's our status? What did you mean by impossible? Mary's hands flew over her controls, bringing up damage reports and sensor readings. We've got about 4 hours of breathable air left with the current hull breaches. Temperature control is failing, but that's not the strangest part. She looked up, her eyes wide. According to our depth gauge, we're nearly 7 miles beneath the ocean floor. That's not possible, I said, moving to check the readings myself. The instruments must be damaged. That's what I thought too, she replied. But look at the atmospheric sensors. I stared at the display, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This says, outside pressure is nearly identical to sea level, and there's oxygen? That can't be right. There's more, Mary continued. External temperature readings are holding steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I shook my head, wincing as pain shot through my skull. The sensors must be malfunctioning. We're at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. The pressure should be crushing, and there's certainly no breathable air. Look for yourself, Mary said, pointing toward the observation window. I limped across the tilted floor to the thick glass portal. What I saw stopped me cold. We weren't surrounded by the crushing darkness of the deep ocean. Instead, the Oceanus had come to rest on what looked like a rocky shore. Beyond it stretched a vast expanse of water. Not the Pacific Ocean we'd been exploring, but some kind of underground sea. The most astonishing sight was above us. Instead of endless ocean, a massive cavern ceiling stretched as far as I could see, dotted with thousands of bioluminescent organisms that cast an ethereal blue-green light across the landscape. My God, I whispered. It's an underground ecosystem, a completely isolated biosphere. How is this possible? Rachel asked, joining me at the window. We're miles below the seafloor. I don't know, I admitted, but it seems like we found our anomaly, or it found us. A sharp hiss of escaping air drew my attention back to our immediate crisis. One of the hull breaches was worsening. Life support is failing faster than I calculated, Mary reported. We're down to maybe 2 hours of breathable air. I looked from Jose's pale face to the impossible world outside our viewport. The decision was clear, if terrifying. We need to exit the submersible, I announced. Exit? Into that? Brenda gestured toward the window. We have no idea what's out there. The atmosphere readings could be wrong. If they are, we'll die just as surely as we will if we stay here, I countered. At least this way we have a chance. Manuel stepped forward. The sensors are showing breathable air, normal pressure, and survivable temperature. I say we take the risk. I nodded. We need to gather all essential supplies. Survival gear, medical equipment, communications equipment. Even though it's damaged, we might be able to repair it. Food, water, whatever tools we can carry. "What about Jose?" Rachel asked. "We can't expect him to walk." "We'll improvise a stretcher," I decided. "Use one of the equipment panels. 4 of us can carry him while the 5th handles supplies." We worked quickly, gathering everything we might need to survive. I kept glancing at the view outside, still unable to fully process what I was seeing. The bioluminescent ceiling cast enough light to see by, revealing a landscape both alien and somehow familiar. Rock formations, what looked like vegetation near the water's edge, and the dark expanse of the subterranean ocean stretching into the distance. "Emergency hatch is our best exit point," Mary said after checking the submersible's damage. "The main hatch is buckled from the impact." "Let's move," I ordered as another alarm joined the chorus. Oxygen levels are dropping faster now. Getting Jose to the emergency hatch was a challenge. We'd fashioned a stretcher from a detached equipment panel, padding it with whatever soft materials we could find. He gritted his teeth against the pain as we carefully maneuvered him through the cramped interior. "I can help more," he insisted, though his face was gray with pain. "Save your strength," I told him. "We're going to need everyone at their best once we're outside." Mary worked the emergency hatch mechanism while Manuel and I held Jose's stretcher steady. The hatch released with a rush of air, not the explosive decompression we would have expected at the bottom of the ocean, but a gentle equalization of pressure that confirmed the sensor readings. "It's really breathable," Brenda said in wonder as fresh air flowed into the cabin. One by one, we exited the Oceanus. Manuel went first to secure the immediate area, then Rachel and Brenda to help receive Jose's stretcher. Mary and I carefully passed him through the hatch before climbing out ourselves. Standing on the rocky shore, I took my first full breath of the air of this impossible place. It tasted slightly metallic, but was otherwise clean. The temperature was mild, just as the sensors had indicated. The ground beneath my feet was solid rock, with smaller stones and what looked like sand closer to the water's edge. "Set Jose down carefully," I directed, and we placed his stretcher on a relatively flat area. He looked up at the glowing ceiling in amazement, despite his pain. "I'd say this counts as a significant discovery," he joked weakly. I smiled at his attempt at humor, then turned to assess our situation more fully. The Oceanus was in bad shape. The hull was breached in multiple places, the propulsion system destroyed. The communication array, our only link to the surface, was a twisted mass of metal and circuitry. "We're not getting back to the surface in that," Mary said, stating the obvious. "And we're too deep for any conventional rescue," Manuel added, "even if they know exactly where we are, which they don't." I looked around at my team. 5 people stranded in an environment that shouldn't exist, miles beneath the ocean floor, with limited supplies and one serious injury. Our situation couldn't be much worse. "So what do we do now?" Rachel asked, giving voice to the question on everyone's mind. I turned to look at the vast underground ocean stretching before us, then back at the damaged submersible that had been our home and our lifeline. "We survive," I said. "We explore. We figure out what this place is and how it exists. And we look for a way back to the surface." I crouched at the water's edge, carefully scraping mineral deposits from rocks that jutted out from the shore. We'd been at it for nearly an hour, collecting whatever might help us understand this impossible place. Rachel knelt beside me, methodically filling small sample containers with water from different spots along the shoreline. "The mineral composition here doesn't match anything I've ever seen," Rachel said, holding up a rock with blue-green crystals embedded in its surface. "Look at these formations." I took the sample, turning it in my palm. The crystals caught the light from the bioluminescent ceiling, throwing tiny blue flashes across my hand. "Add it to the collection," I said, passing it back. We need all the data we can get. While Rachel labeled the sample, I looked back at our makeshift camp. The others had been busy establishing a temporary base near the damaged Oceanus. Mary and Manuel had rigged up some of our emergency lights around the perimeter, creating a small island of brightness. Brenda was organizing our limited supplies, taking inventory of what we'd managed to salvage. Jose lay on an improvised cot, his splinted leg elevated on a pack. His face was tight with pain despite the medication we'd given him. We'd been exploring for nearly 3 hours since exiting the submersible, but it felt like days. The cavern stretched around us, vast and silent except for the occasional drip of water from the distant ceiling. The air carried a strange metallic tang that coated the back of my throat with each breath. "How long do you think we can survive down here?" Rachel asked quietly, capping another water sample. I picked up another rock, examining its unusual texture. "Let's worry about understanding where here is first." A movement in the water caught my eye. About 30 feet from shore, the surface rippled slightly. I froze, watching. Another ripple appeared, then another, creating concentric circles that spread outward. Something was wrong. There was no wind in this cavern, no current that I could detect in the water. Nothing should be creating those ripples. "Larry." Rachel had noticed my sudden stillness. I held up my hand, signaling her to be quiet. The ripples increased, spreading across the previously calm surface. My instincts screamed danger. "Pack up," I said, my voice low but urgent. "Now." Rachel didn't question me, immediately gathering the sample containers and shoving them into her pack. I scanned the water again, noting more disturbances spreading toward the shore. Something was moving beneath the surface, coming closer. I grabbed Rachel's arm, yanking her to her feet. "Everyone back to the submersible. Now." My shout echoed across the cavern. At the camp, heads turned our way, expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. "Move!" I yelled again, pulling Rachel with me as I backpedaled from the water's edge. "Get to the Oceanus." Mary reacted first, dropping what she was holding and rushing to help Jose. Manuel and Brenda hesitated for only a second before following her lead, grabbing essential supplies. I kept my eyes on the water as Rachel and I retreated. The ripples had transformed into wakes now, cutting through the surface like torpedoes heading straight for shore. "What is it?" Rachel gasped, stumbling slightly as we ran across the rocky ground. "Don't know," I said, "but I don't want to find out in the open." We were halfway to the submersible when the first creature broke the surface. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. A sleek, predatory body, at least 12 feet long, covered in silvery scales that caught the bioluminescent light. A massive, tooth-filled jaw that seemed to comprise half its body length. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered beside me. But it was there. And it wasn't alone. 2 more surfaced behind it, then 3 more, their powerful bodies propelling them toward the shore with frightening speed. "Zephactinus," I said, the name coming from some distant part of my brain that wasn't frozen in shock. "There's Zephactinus." "That can't be right," Rachel said, her voice rising in pitch. "They've been extinct for 65 million years. Yet the evidence was swimming right toward us. Prehistoric fish that shouldn't exist. Their bodies perfect matches for the fossil records I'd studied years ago." The lead fish reached the shallows, its massive body thrashing as it propelled itself partially onto the shore, jaw snapping. "Everyone inside," I shouted, seeing that Mary and Manuel had managed to get Jose to the submersible's hatch. "Hurry!" Brenda was already climbing through, helping to pull Jose inside despite his cries of pain as they maneuvered his broken leg. Manuel followed quickly after, then Mary. I pushed Rachel ahead of me, keeping myself between her and the creatures now dragging themselves across the rocks with surprising agility for fish out of deep water. Their movements were driven by hunger. I could see it in the mindless way they thrashed forward, jaws opening and closing. As Rachel climbed through the hatch, I risked another glance back. More of the creatures had appeared, at least a dozen now. They seemed particularly agitated, changing direction to follow a trail that led directly to our position. With horrible clarity, I understood what was drawing them. "They're following Jose's blood," I said as I backed toward the hatch. Small drops of red marked the path where we'd carried him from our camp to the submersible. The scent had triggered a feeding response. I scrambled through the hatch just as the first Xiphactinus reached the Oceanus, its massive body slamming against the hull with enough force to rock the entire submersible. I grabbed the hatch wheel and spun it, securing the seal just as another creature rammed us. "What the hell are those things?" Mary asked, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "Prehistoric fish," Rachel answered before I could. "Apex predators from the late Cretaceous period." "How is that possible?" Manuel asked. I moved to the observation window, wiping away condensation to get a clearer view. Outside, the creatures circled our vessel, their primitive eyes fixed on us with cold hunger. "About as possible as finding an underground ocean 7 miles below the seafloor," I said. Yet here we are. The Oceanus shuddered as another fish slammed into it. Though the submersible was damaged, its hull was designed to withstand extreme deep-sea pressures. It would hold against these attacks, at least for now. "They're testing for weaknesses," I said, watching as the creatures systematically rammed different sections of our vessel. "These aren't mindless animals. They're hunting with a strategy." "Can they get in?" Brenda asked, her voice tight with fear. I didn't answer immediately, watching as one of the larger specimens rammed the same spot where a hairline crack had formed during our descent. The crack widened slightly with the impact. "The hull's compromised in several places," I finally said. "It wasn't designed to take this kind of focused attack." Jose groaned from where he lay. "So we're trapped in here? What about our supplies? Most of them are still outside." He was right. In our rush to escape, we'd only grabbed the essentials. The majority of our food, water, and equipment remained at the camp. Another violent impact rocked the submersible. I braced myself against the control panel, noting how the creatures seemed to be coordinating their attacks now, hitting us from multiple angles almost simultaneously. "They're getting more aggressive," Rachel said, joining me at the window. I nodded, watching the pattern of their movements. The Xiphactinus circled and struck with increasing force. Each impact stressed our already damaged hull further. Then something changed. The smaller fish, about 8 to 10 feet long, suddenly scattered, breaking their attack pattern. They darted away from the submersible, retreating into deeper water. "That's not good," I said, tension crawling up my spine. "Why?" "They're leaving," Brenda said, a note of hope in her voice. "Predators don't retreat without reason," I replied, scanning the water beyond the scattered fish. Something scared them off. The others joined me at the window, peering into the murky water. For several seconds, we saw nothing but the retreating forms of the Xiphactinus. Then the water bulged, as if displaced by something massive moving beneath the surface. A shadow formed, growing larger as it approached from the depths. "What is that?" Mary whispered. The shadow resolved into a shape that made my blood run cold. An enormous armored head, at least 10 feet across, with a jaw structure unlike anything living in today's oceans. The creature rose from the depths with deliberate slowness, its ancient eyes fixing on our submersible. "Dunkleosteus," I said, the word barely audible even to myself. The prehistoric armored fish was enormous, at least 40 feet long, its body covered in bony plates that gleamed dully in the bioluminescent light. It moved with the confidence of an apex predator that had never known defeat, circling our vessel once, studying us. Those eyes, they weren't the mindless eyes of a fish. There was intelligence there, predatory, cold, but undeniably calculating. It was assessing us, determining if we were prey or threat. "That thing can't exist," Manuel said. "It's impossible." "About as impossible as everything else down here," I replied, unable to look away from the massive creature. The Dunkleosteus completed its circle, then stopped directly in front of the observation window. For a moment, it seemed to look right at me, its ancient gaze meeting mine across millions of years of evolutionary separation. Then it charged. The impact was catastrophic. The entire submersible slid backward across the rocky shore, metal screaming as the hull buckled under forces it was never designed to withstand. We were all thrown to the floor, equipment raining down around us. "It's trying to kill us," Brenda screamed. I pulled myself up using the edge of the control panel, my eyes fixed on the window. The Dunkleosteus had backed off, but I could see it turning for another attack run. "Brace yourselves," I shouted just before the second impact hit. The hull groaned, metal stress points shrieking as the massive prehistoric fish slammed into us with the force of a battering ram. Water began spraying through a new breach near the ceiling, hissing as it hit exposed wiring. The water sprayed harder with each hit, turning from a mist to a steady stream. The electrical system sparked and hissed where moisture hit exposed wiring. I grabbed a loose section of paneling and wedged it against the worst of the leaks, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. "We can't take many more hits like that," Jose said through gritted teeth. Despite his broken leg, he'd pulled himself up to check the engineering readouts on his tablet. "Hull integrity is down to 37% in 3 sections. One more direct hit in the same spot and we're done." The submersible rocked as the Dunkleosteus circled us again, its massive armored body scraping against our outer hull. The sound vibrated through the metal, a low, grinding noise that set my teeth on edge. "Where did it go?" Rachel asked, pressing her face against one of the few intact observation ports. I moved beside her, careful to keep my balance on the tilted floor. "I can't see it. Might be circling around for another run." The momentary calm gave me a chance to take in our surroundings more clearly. The cavern stretched far beyond what our emergency lights could illuminate, the ceiling studded with those strange bioluminescent organisms that cast everything in an eerie blue glow. The water lapped at the rocky shore about 20 yards from where the Oceanus had been pushed by the initial attack. Something caught my eye at the far end of the lake, a sudden plume of white shooting upward. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing. Rachel pressed closer to the window. "See what?" "There. Wait for it." I counted under my breath, and after about 30 seconds, another jet of steam erupted from the water. "That? It's some kind of vent." The others crowded around the remaining intact observation ports. Mary wiped condensation from her window. "It's like a geyser or something." "Not just any geyser," I said, my mind racing through possibilities. "It's a geothermal vent. That explains the stable temperature down here despite being miles below the surface." Manuel joined us, carefully stepping over loose equipment. "So what? How does that help us with Jaws out there trying to eat us?" Another blast of steam shot up higher than before, the white column disappearing into the darkness above. "Those vents don't just appear anywhere," I said, feeling the first spark of hope since we'd crashed. "They form where there's a direct path to release pressure. That could be a shaft or channel that leads up." Rachel caught on immediately. You think it connects to the surface, or at least to another level closer to it, I said. Either way, it's the only direction that matters right now. Up. The Dunkleosteus slammed into us again, throwing us all off balance. I hit the wall hard, pain flaring across my already injured shoulder. Brenda fell across Jose, who cried out as she landed near his broken leg. We need to move, I said, pushing myself up. If we can get the submersible to that vent, maybe the force of the eruption could push us upward. That's insane, Manuel said. We don't know if the passage is wide enough, or if the pressure would crush us instead of helping us. You have a better idea? I asked. We stay here. That thing out there eventually gets in, or we run out of air trying to wait it out. Mary brushed debris from her console. The engines are damaged but not completely gone. If we can get power to the thrusters, we might be able to make it across the lake. I turned to Jose, who was examining his tablet with furrowed brows. Can you get the engines working? With this leg? He gestured to his splinted limb. I know it's asking a lot, I said, crouching beside him. But you know the systems better than any of us. Jose ran a hand over his face, smearing sweat and grime. I might be able to reroute power from the main reactor to the auxiliary thrusters. The primaries are shot, but the secondaries might give us enough push to get across. What about the hull breaches? Brenda asked. Even if we can move, we'll sink if we take on more water. We patch what we can, I said. Use whatever materials we've got left. Rachel was still staring out the window. The creature's circling again, moving slower now, maybe getting tired. Or planning its next attack, I muttered. We need to work fast. I helped Jose to the engineering access panel near the rear of the cabin. He directed me to remove the cover, revealing a maze of circuitry and control modules. Hand me that diagnostic tool, he said, pointing to his equipment bag. I passed him the device, watching as he plugged it into a port and began typing commands. I can bypass the safety protocols and direct all remaining power to the thrusters, but it's risky. We could overload the system. We're out of safe options, I replied. While Jose worked on the power systems, I turned to Brenda. Dr. Lee, you and Mary need to patch those hull breaches. Use emergency sealant from the repair kits, and if that's not enough, strip material from the interior panels. Brenda nodded and hurried to gather supplies, Mary following close behind. They began applying sealant to the worst of the leaks, the thick polymer expanding on contact with water to form temporary plugs. I moved to Manuel's station. I need you to time those eruptions. I want to know exactly how often they happen and how long they last. Manuel raised an eyebrow but took out his watch and began observing the distant vent. I joined him at the window, studying the pattern of the eruptions. After several minutes, the data became clear. They're coming exactly 18 minutes apart, Manuel reported. Each eruption lasts between 28 and 32 seconds. That's our window then, I said. We'll time our approach to hit the vent just as it starts to erupt. Manuel lowered his voice. Look, even if we reach that vent, the temperature of that water has to be near boiling. The hull can't handle that kind of heat stress after all the damage it's taken. I know the risks, I said, meeting his gaze. But what's our alternative? Stay here until our oxygen runs out, or that prehistoric monster breaks through? The submersible shuddered as the Dunkleosteus made another pass, this one less forceful but still concerning. It's testing us, Rachel said from her position at another window. Learning our weaknesses. I returned to Jose, who was deep in concentration as he rerouted circuits. How's it coming? Almost there, he said, not looking up from his work. I've bypassed the main power relays and redirected emergency reserves to the auxiliary thrusters. We'll have maybe 5 minutes of propulsion before the system fries completely. 5 minutes is all we need if we time it right, I said. Mary called from the front of the cabin. We've sealed the major breaches, but there are still small leaks we can't reach. We're taking on water, but slowly now. Good work, I said. That buys us time. I helped Jose close up the access panel and moved him back to his makeshift bed. His face was pale from the exertion, but he gave me a thumbs up. The controls are reconfigured, he said. Mary can pilot from the main console now. I nodded and turned to Mary. Get ready at the controls. We'll wait for the next eruption, time it, and then make our move right before the one after that. Mary took her position at the pilot station, running a systems check on the jury-rigged controls. Thrusters are responding, not at full power, but they should get us across. Brenda finished securing loose equipment and joined Rachel at the observation window. The water around the vent must be extremely hot, she warned. The submersible wasn't designed for those temperatures. We don't need it to last forever, I replied. Just long enough to ride the eruption up. Manuel checked his watch again. Next eruption in about 2 minutes. We all fell silent, watching through the observation ports as the Dunkleosteus continued to circle our damaged vessel. I could feel the tension in the cabin, everyone's breath held collectively as we waited for our chance. There! Rachel pointed as another plume of steam shot up from the distant fissure. Manuel started timing immediately. 30 seconds. And it's stopping now. Confirmed. 18 minutes between eruptions, approximately 30 seconds of active eruption. I looked at each member of my team. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, I saw determination in their eyes. We have one shot at this. The next eruption will be in 18 minutes. We time our approach to reach the vent with about 30 seconds to spare. And if we miss the timing? Brenda asked quietly. We don't, I said firmly. Mary, plot the most direct course to the vent. Manuel, keep tracking the time. Everyone else secure yourselves as best you can. This isn't going to be a smooth ride. I helped secure Jose, making sure he was braced for the journey. Rachel and Brenda found handholds and strapped themselves in with what remained of the safety harnesses. Manuel kept his eyes on his watch. 15 minutes until the next eruption. Mary powered up the thrusters, the submersible humming as energy flowed to the auxiliary systems. Thrusters at 68%. It'll have to be enough. I took my position beside Mary, ready to assist with navigation. Let's get as close as we can before we make our final approach. We need to conserve power for the last push. Mary nodded and gently engaged the thrusters. The Oceanus shuddered, then slowly began to move away from the shore. The sudden movement caught the attention of the Dunkleosteus, which turned sharply in the water. It's coming back, Brenda called out. Full power, I ordered. We need to outrun it. Mary pushed the thrusters to maximum, and the submersible lurched forward, skimming just below the surface of the lake. Behind us, the massive fish charged, its armored head aimed directly at our stern. Brace! I shouted, as the creature slammed into us one final time. The impact sent us spinning, but also propelled us further across the lake. Mary fought with the controls, stabilizing our course toward the distant vent. 10 minutes to eruption, Manuel reported, his knuckles white as he gripped his handhold. The Dunkleosteus fell behind, either tired from its attacks or unwilling to follow us into deeper water. We continued our approach to the vent, the damaged submersible protesting with every meter. The temperature's rising, Brenda warned, pointing to one of the few functioning external sensors. We're entering a thermal gradient. I could feel the heat even through the hull, the interior of the Oceanus growing uncomfortably warm. Sweat beaded on my forehead as we pushed closer to the vent. 5 minutes, Manuel called out. Mary adjusted our course, slowing our approach. We need to position directly over the vent opening. I peered through the forward observation port, trying to locate the exact point of eruption. The water bubbled and churned, small jets of steam occasionally breaking the surface. There, I pointed. See that circular formation? That's where it's coming from. Mary guided us carefully, the thrusters straining as we maneuvered into position. The heat continued to build, warning lights flashing on what remained of our control panels. 2 minutes, Manuel said, his voice tight. Hull temperature approaching critical levels, Jose warned from his position, checking readings on his tablet. The integrity in the aft section is failing. Hold it together, I muttered, unsure if I was talking to the submersible or my crew. Just a little longer. 1 minute, Manuel announced. Mary held the Oceanus steady above the vent, fighting against the currents created by the heat difference. I could hear the metal groaning around us, stressed beyond its design limits. 30 seconds, Manuel said. I grabbed a handhold, securing myself. Everyone hold on tight. This is it. 10 seconds. The water beneath us began to churn more violently. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The eruption hit with tremendous force, sending the Oceanus rocketing upward. The pressure slammed us into our seats and handholds. The roar was deafening, steam and superheated water propelling us through a narrow shaft that seemed to go on forever. I couldn't see, couldn't think beyond holding on as we were carried upward by the powerful geyser. The force of the eruption flung us upward with brutal intensity. My body slammed against the ceiling before gravity pulled me back down. A wave of scalding water rushed through the cracks in our hull, adding to the chaos. The submersible twisted and turned as it shot through the narrow passage, making it impossible to maintain any sense of direction. When the violent movement finally stopped, we found ourselves floating in another cavern. This one was smaller than the first, with less bioluminescence casting weaker blue light across the dark water. I pushed myself up from the floor, my head throbbing from the impact. "Status report," I called out, wiping hot water from my face. Mary groaned from the pilot's chair. "We're still alive, barely, but we're taking on water faster now." I made my way to Jose, who lay pale and sweating on his makeshift bed. The violent journey had clearly worsened his condition. His splinted leg was at an odd angle, and fresh blood stained the bandages. "Jose, how you holding up?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He opened his eyes slowly. "Been better, Larry. The leg's bad. Losing too much blood." A dull thud against the outer hull interrupted us. I steadied myself as the submersible rocked slightly. "What was that?" Brenda asked, her voice tight with fear. I moved to one of the intact observation ports and peered out. My stomach dropped. "It followed us. The Dunkleosteus. It's here." Rachel joined me at the window. "That's impossible. How could it survive the heat of the geyser?" "Maybe it found another way up," I said, watching the massive armored fish circle our vessel. "Or maybe there's more than one." The creature slammed into us again, harder this time. Water sprayed from a new breach in the ceiling. "We need to work fast," I said, turning to face everyone. "Mary, let's get the navigation systems back online. Jose, I know you're in pain, but we need your expertise on the power distribution. Brenda, grab the sealant. We need to patch these new leaks. Manuel, keep timing those eruptions. Rachel, help me track this thing's movements. We need to understand its behavior if we're going to survive." Everyone moved with renewed urgency. I helped Mary reach the navigation console, which had partially detached from its mounting during our violent journey. "The gyroscopic stabilizers are shot," Mary said, tapping on a cracked display. And the sonar array is giving false readings. We're practically blind down here. I examined the mess of wires hanging from beneath the console. We don't need everything, just enough to know which way is up. If there's another geyser in this cavern, we need to find it. We worked methodically, reconnecting essential systems while discarding damaged components. Mary's hands were steady despite the pressure, her face set in determined concentration. "Pass me that diagnostic tool," she said, pointing to a device near my feet. I handed it to her and watched as she ran tests on the partially restored systems. "Anything?" "Maybe," she replied. "I'm getting some readings from the auxiliary sensors. There's definitely another thermal vent in this cavern, about 200 meters northwest of our position." Another impact rocked the submersible, less forceful this time but more precise, targeting the same weakened section of hull. "It's learning," I said, "testing our weaknesses." I made my way back to Jose, who was propped up against a storage container, tablet in hand. His skin had taken on a gray pallor, and his breathing was shallow. "Jose, talk to me about power distribution. Can we get enough juice to the thrusters to reach that vent?" He nodded weakly. "The main power couplings were damaged in the ascent. You'll need to rewire the auxiliary battery to bypass the damaged sections." He tapped on his tablet, bringing up a schematic. "See these junction points? You need to connect them directly." I studied the diagram. "That's going to overload the system." "Yes," Jose agreed. "But it'll give you maybe 10 minutes of propulsion before the whole thing fries. Should be enough to reach the vent." I squeezed his shoulder gently. "Hang in there, Jose. We're going to get out of this." His eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of doubt. "Just get everyone home, Larry." I moved to the engineering access panel and began the delicate work of rewiring the power distribution system according to Jose's instructions. My hands were wet and shaking slightly, making the precise task even harder. Brenda approached, carrying a container of emergency sealant. "How's it looking?" "Not great," I admitted. "But Jose thinks we can get enough power to make it to another vent. How's the hull?" "I've sealed what I can," she said. "But we're still taking on water. The patches from earlier are holding, but these new breaches are worse. The pressure changes from the ascent weakened the structural integrity." "Let's test what you've done so far," I suggested, wiping my hands on my pants. "We need to know if they'll hold long enough." Together, we inspected each patch, applying pressure to test for leaks. Water seeped through in several places, forming small but steady streams. "This isn't good enough," Brenda said, frustration evident in her voice. "The patches won't hold if that thing hits us again." "They don't need to hold forever," I replied. "Just long enough to get us to the next vent. Apply another layer here and here." I pointed to the worst leaks. "And use the structural foam to reinforce this section." As Brenda worked on the hull, I joined Rachel at the observation port. She had been tracking the Dunkleosteus's movements, noting its patterns on a makeshift chart. "What have you found?" I asked. Rachel showed me her notes. "It's not hunting behavior. It's territorial. See how it circles before each attack? And it's not trying to get in. It's trying to push us away from this area." I watched the creature make another pass. "You're right. It doesn't want to eat us. It wants us gone." "Which means there might be a way to use that to our advantage," Rachel suggested. "If we move toward the vent, away from whatever it's protecting, it might lose interest." The submersible shuddered as the Dunkleosteus slammed into us again, this time from below. The impact was followed by a low rumbling that seemed to come from the cavern itself. That wasn't the fish, Manuel called out from his station. That was geological. I steadied myself against a bulkhead. The cavern's unstable. Manuel, what's the timing on the eruptions in this section? Manuel consulted his notes. Based on what I've observed, the eruptions occur approximately every 22 minutes and last about 40 seconds. But there's variation. Sometimes they're as close as 19 minutes apart. I felt another tremor, stronger this time. And when was the last one? About 16 minutes ago, Manuel replied. We should have a window in the next 3 to 6 minutes. I moved to the navigation console where Mary was still working. We need to calculate exactly where to position ourselves over that vent. If we're too far to the side, we'll miss the main force of the eruption. Mary nodded, studying the readings from the restored sensors. Based on the thermal signature, the vent opening is approximately 15 meters in diameter. If we center ourselves directly above it, the eruption should carry us upward, just like before. Together we created a detailed timeline for our escape attempt. The plan was risky. We would use our limited power to position the submersible directly over the vent, timing our arrival to coincide with the beginning of an eruption. We'll have one shot at this, I said, marking the critical points on Mary's chart. If we miss the eruption, or if the hull doesn't hold, we're finished. Another tremor shook the cavern, more violent than the previous ones. Loose equipment clattered to the floor, and a shower of small rocks pelted the outer hull of the submersible. This whole place could come down around us, I said, watching as cracks formed in the cavern ceiling. The geological activity is increasing. If we don't get out soon, we might be trapped here permanently. With our makeshift repairs finished and the escape route plotted, I noticed the Dunkleosteus had temporarily withdrawn, perhaps disturbed by the tremors. Everyone gather round, I called out. We need to go over the plan one last time. The team assembled with Manuel helping Jose to join the group. I laid out our desperate strategy, explaining each person's role in the escape attempt. Mary will pilot us to the vent using the partial navigation data we've restored. Brenda and I will monitor the hull integrity. Rachel will keep an eye on our friend out there in case it returns. Manuel will time the eruption based on his observations. And Jose has set up the power system to give us what we need. I looked at each of them, taking in their exhausted, frightened faces. I need to be clear about something. We have very limited reactor power. Jose estimates we have perhaps 10 minutes of propulsion before the systems fail completely. That means our escape window is critically narrow. We need to time this perfectly. A heavy silence fell over the group as the reality of our situation sank in. The submersible creaked around us, water dripping steadily from multiple points in the ceiling. Questions? I asked. Rachel spoke up. What if the eruption doesn't carry us all the way to the surface? Then we'll hopefully end up in another cavern, like this one, I replied, and we'll figure out our next move from there. But staying here isn't an option. Mary nodded toward the navigation console. The thrusters are ready. Just say the word. I checked my watch, then looked at Manuel. How long until the next eruption? Based on my calculations, about 2 minutes, he answered. Then let's move, I said. Everyone to your stations. This is our only chance. I positioned myself next to Mary at the control station, my shoulder pressing against hers as we both leaned forward to study the readouts. The control panel flickered with amber warnings, but we had no choice now. Everyone secure yourselves, I called out, glancing back at the others. This is going to be rough. Rachel had wedged herself between 2 storage compartments, using straps torn from equipment bags to anchor herself in place. Manuel sat with his back against the bulkhead, one arm looped through an exposed pipe fitting, Brenda knelt beside Jose, who lay pale and sweating on his makeshift stretcher, his splinted leg propped up on a bundle of emergency blankets. "Jose, you hanging in there?" I asked. He gave me a weak thumbs up. "Don't worry about me. Just get us out of here." I turned back to Mary and nodded. "Do it. Full power to the thrusters." Mary's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision despite the dire circumstances. She engaged the startup sequence, and I felt a shudder run through the submersible as the engine sputtered to life. The sound was wrong, a stuttering, irregular whine instead of the smooth hum we were accustomed to. "That doesn't sound good," I muttered. "It's the best we're going to get," Mary replied, her voice tight with concentration. "The power couplings are barely holding together. We're running on about 40% capacity." The emergency lights dimmed momentarily as power diverted to the propulsion system. Another tremor ran through the cavern, sending a shower of small rocks pattering against our outer hull. "We need to move now," I said. "The whole place could come down on us." Mary pushed the throttle forward, and the Oceanus responded with a lurch. We began to move away from the rocky shore, the damaged vessel sliding into the dark water of the underground lake. I checked the reactor temperature readout and felt a spike of alarm. The reactor's running hot, 178 and climbing. "How high can it go before we have a problem?" Mary asked, not taking her eyes off the navigation display. 200 is the red line," I answered. "At 220 we risk a meltdown." "Then let's hope we reach that vent before we hit 200. We pushed deeper into the lake, and I could see debris floating on the surface, chunks of rock that had fallen from the ceiling during the tremors. Some were small enough to bounce off our hull, but others were the size of cars. "Watch out," I warned as Mary guided us between two massive boulders. "We can't take any more hull damage." The submersible scraped against something underwater, the sound of metal on rock making everyone wince. Water began spraying from a new crack near the floor, adding to the puddles already gathering. "Manuel, how long until the next eruption?" I called out. He checked his watch. "About 1 minute and 40 seconds, if the pattern holds." I nodded, trying to keep my focus on the immediate tasks rather than all the ways this could go wrong. The reactor temperature had climbed to 185 degrees. "Movement in the water behind us," Rachel called from her observation position. "I think our friend is back." Manuel swiveled to look through another viewport. "Confirmed. The Dunkley Osteus has sensed us moving. It's coming our way." My stomach tightened. "Mary, can we get any more speed?" "I'm giving it everything," she replied, her knuckles white on the controls. "If I push it harder, we might lose power completely." I looked over at Jose, who was struggling to maintain consciousness while monitoring the power distribution on his tablet. His face had taken on a gray pallor, and fresh blood had seeped through the bandages on his leg. "Jose, how are we looking on power?" I asked, moving to his side. "Not good," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "The main coupling is overheating. I'm trying to reroute through secondary systems, but..." He broke off, grimacing in pain. "Let me help," I said, taking the tablet from him. I studied the schematic he'd pulled up, noting the critical power junctions highlighted in red. "Tell me what to do." "Toggle between screens 3 and 4, he instructed weakly. "Monitor the load distribution. If any sector goes above 90%, redirect manually using the command line at the bottom." I nodded, settling into a crouch beside him as I kept one eye on the tablet and another on our progress across the lake. The submersible suddenly tilted to one side as Mary executed a sharp turn to avoid a massive underwater obstacle. Equipment that hadn't been properly secured began sliding across the floor. "Brenda, we need to stabilize this gear," I shouted as a heavy case skidded toward Jose. Brenda moved quickly, intercepting the case before it could hit him. Together, we worked to secure loose equipment, using emergency straps and whatever we could find to keep things from becoming projectiles if we hit more turbulence. "That sample container has my mineral specimens," Brenda said as we tied down a large plastic box. "If we make it back, those could help us understand this place." "When we make it back," I corrected her. The submersible lurched again, this time more violently. Mary called out an apology as she navigated around another obstacle. "The Dunkleosteus is gaining on us," Manuel warned. "It's moving faster than before." I returned to the front of the cabin, peering out through the main viewport. In the distance, I could see our destination, a circular opening in the cavern wall where periodic eruptions of superheated water shot upward with tremendous force. Even from here, I could see steam billowing from the vent. "There it is," I said, pointing. "Mary, keep us on course." "Trying to," she replied through gritted teeth. "But this thing handles like a drunk elephant now." The reactor temperature had reached 193 degrees. We had maybe 5 minutes before we'd need to power down or risk a meltdown. "Manuel, time?" I asked. 50 seconds until eruption," he answered, eyes locked on his watch. I felt a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. We were still too far from the vent. At our current speed, we wouldn't reach it before the eruption started, which meant waiting another 22 minutes for the next one, time we didn't have. "Mary, we need more speed," I urged. "If I push it any harder—" "I know the risks, do it anyway." She nodded and pushed the throttle past what should have been its maximum setting. The engine noise changed pitch, rising to a concerning whine, but our speed increased noticeably. The reactor temperature jumped to 198 degrees. "We're cutting it close," I murmured. 30 seconds to eruption," Manuel called out. Rachel's voice came from the rear viewport, high with tension. "It's right behind us now. I can see its eyes." I moved to look out the rear observation port. The Dunkleosteus was closing in fast, its massive armored head cleaving through the water less than 50 yards behind us. Its eyes were fixed on our vessel, primitive, yet calculating. The creature was easily 40 feet long, with armor plates covering its head and jaws that could crush through steel. 20 seconds, Manuel said. "We're not going to make it," Brenda whispered. I returned to the front, standing beside Mary as we both stared at the approaching vent. We were close now, maybe 100 yards away, but the timing was going to be tight. 10 seconds, Manuel counted. Mary adjusted our course slightly, aiming directly for the center of the circular opening. 5 seconds. The reactor temperature hit 202 degrees. Warning alarms began to sound, adding to the cacophony already filling the cabin. 3, 2, 1. I gripped the edge of the control panel, bracing myself. "Everyone hold on!" Just as Manuel reached 0, we saw the first bubbles erupting from the vent ahead of us. The water's surface began to roil and churn. "Full reverse!" I shouted, and Mary slammed the throttle into the reverse position, fighting to stop our forward momentum. We needed to be over the vent, not inside it, when the full force of the eruption hit. The submersible shuddered as the engine strained against our forward motion. We slowed, then stopped about 20 yards from the vent, just as the eruption began in earnest, a massive column of water shooting upward with incredible force. "Get us in position," I ordered, and Mary carefully nudged the throttle forward, moving us toward the edge of the eruption. A massive impact rocked the submersible from behind. The Dunkleosteus had caught up to us. "It's got us," Rachel screamed as the vessel tilted sharply backward. I was thrown against the control panel, pain flaring in my ribs. Through the rear viewport, I could see the enormous creature's jaws clamped onto our stern, trying to drag us backward. "Full power forward!" I yelled. Mary pushed the engines to their absolute limit. The reactor temperature spiked to 210 degrees. For a moment, we were caught in a tug-of-war between the Dunkleosteus and our straining engines. Then, with a screech of tearing metal, we lurched forward, breaking free of the creature's grip. "Now, get us over that vent," I commanded. Mary guided us forward, positioning the Oceanus directly over the churning water. The eruption was building, water beginning to shoot upward with increasing force. "Brace yourselves," I called out. "This is going to be—" My words were cut off as the Dunkleosteus slammed into us again from behind. This time I felt the submersible shudder violently as the creature's massive teeth scraped against our hull, the sound of metal being torn open filling the cabin. Water began pouring in through new breaches, and everyone grabbed for handholds as the impact threatened to throw us off course. "Cut the engines!" I yelled to Mary as we centered over the geyser's opening. "We need to let the eruption carry us!" Mary slammed her hand down on the emergency shutdown, killing the already strained thrusters. The sudden silence felt wrong after the constant mechanical whine that had filled the cabin. Water still leaked through our patched hull, pooling around our feet. Everyone held tight to whatever secure point they could find as we floated directly above the churning water. "How long?" I asked, my voice tight. Manuel checked his watch. "Any second now." I looked back at the rest of the crew. Rachel had wedged herself between two storage units, her knuckles white from gripping a safety rail. Brenda sat next to Jose, whose face had gone ashen, his broken legs still propped up on makeshift cushions. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill in the cabin. Is it working?" Brenda asked, her voice barely audible over the creaking hull. I turned back to the observation window. The water below us looked calm. Too calm. "Something's wrong," I said. "We should be feeling—" Nothing happened. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes as we hovered there, the damaged submersible taking on more water by the second. Mary shot me a panicked look. "The eruption cycle," I said. "Could our calculations be—" The world exploded. One moment we were floating. The next, a wall of force slammed into us from below. The submersible shot upward like a cork from a bottle. My body lifted off the floor, then crashed into the ceiling as the vessel tumbled and spun. Pain blazed through my shoulder and back. Someone screamed. Maybe it was me. The noise was overwhelming. A roar of water mixed with the screech of metal and the shouts of my team. The superheated water blasted our vessel up the narrow shaft with such violence that I couldn't tell which way was up or down. The pressure crushed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Through the spinning chaos, I caught a glimpse out the rear observation port. The Dunkleosteus had followed us into the eruption's path. Its massive armored body thrashed in the superheated water, scales peeling away as the extreme temperatures cooked it alive. Even this prehistoric monster couldn't withstand the full force of nature. Its movements grew weaker as it was carried upward behind us, trapped in the same violent current. "Reactors redlining," Mary shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar. I tried to crawl toward her, but another violent lurch sent me sliding across the floor into a bulkhead. The submersible spun like a top as we rocketed up the vertical shaft. Every impact threatened to knock me unconscious. My vision narrowed, dark spots dancing at the edges. I fought to stay aware, to think through what was happening to us. "Hull integrity at 23%, Manuel called out, somehow still monitoring systems despite being thrown around. I pulled myself up using a hanging cable, only to be knocked down again as we hit something in the shaft. A horrible screech of metal tore through the cabin as part of our outer hull peeled away. Water sprayed through new breaches, but the pressure of our ascent actually pushed it back out. The control panel sparked and smoked. Lights flickered throughout the cabin, plunging us into darkness for seconds at a time before emergency backups kicked in. Each time the lights came back, I saw a new horror. Equipment torn free from mountings, water pouring through new cracks, my team clinging desperately to anything bolted down. "Jose!" I shouted, spotting him across the cabin. His eyes were rolling back in his head, his broken leg twisted at an even worse angle from the violent motion. He'd passed out, either from pain or from the G-forces hammering us. Blood seeped through the bandages Brenda had applied earlier. I tried to reach him, but couldn't make it across the pitching floor. The submersible spun again, and I slammed into a wall, pain shooting through my ribs. Nearby, Rachel and Brenda struggled to contain loose equipment that had become deadly projectiles in the cabin. A metal case flew past my head, missing by inches. Rachel lunged to catch a heavy toolbox before it could smash into Jose's unconscious form. The effort cost her as she lost her grip and tumbled across the floor. "Grab something solid," I shouted. Brenda crawled toward a storage locker that had broken free, trying to secure it before it crushed someone. Her hand slipped on the wet metal as she fought to tie it down with a length of cable. "I can't," she gasped, losing her grip as we hit another section of the shaft wall. I pushed off from my position, sliding across the floor to help her. Together we managed to loop the cable through a floor mount and around the locker, pulling it tight. The temporary fix wouldn't hold long, but might prevent immediate disaster. My head throbbed as blood rushed to it, the rapid pressure changes affecting my inner ear and sinuses. Pain stabbed behind my eyes. My nose began to bleed, warm copper taste filling my mouth. The cabin pressure was changing too quickly for our bodies to adapt. "Ascent rate is off the charts," Manuel yelled from his station, where he'd somehow stayed fixed to his seat. His face was contorted with strain as he read from a cracked display. "The differential between inside and outside pressure is climbing. If it gets much worse, the hull could tear apart." I wanted to respond, but my tongue felt thick in my mouth. The pressure changes were affecting all of us. Mary's nose was bleeding too, and Rachel had her hands pressed to her ears in pain. Through the front observation window, strange creatures flashed past, luminous jellyfish-like organisms with long, trailing tentacles that glowed electric blue and green. They seemed to inhabit this vertical shaft, clinging to the walls until our violent passage disturbed them. Some were small as my hand, others larger than our submersible. They pulsed with light as we shot past them. "What are those?" I gasped, but no one answered. The crushing G-forces continued to hammer us as we rocketed upward. My vision blurred. I could feel consciousness slipping away, despite my best efforts to stay awake. We needed to prepare for whatever waited at the end of this shaft. Another cavern, or perhaps even the surface. But the catastrophic stress on my body proved too much. My grip on the cable loosened. The last thing I saw was Mary still fighting with the controls, trying to give us some stability in our chaotic ascent. Then blackness swept over me, pulling me under once again. The harsh, warm light penetrated my eyelids, dragging me back to consciousness. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, and the taste of copper lingered in my mouth. I cracked open one eye, then the other, squinting against the brightness that flooded through the cracked observation windows of the Oceanus. "We made it," Mary whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "Larry, we're at the surface." I blinked several times, trying to process her words. The chaotic spinning and violent forces of our ascent had knocked me out cold, and now sunlight, actual sunlight, was streaming into our battered submersible. After days in the darkness of the deep ocean and the strange bioluminescent caverns below, the natural light felt almost painful. "How?" I croaked, my throat dry and raw. I tried to push myself up from where I'd been thrown against the bulkhead, but my arms trembled under my own weight. Mary was still at the pilot station, her hands gripping the useless controls. Blood had dried in a trail from her temple to her jaw, and her right eye was swollen nearly shut. "The geyser," she said. "It must have connected to a thermal vent that reached all the way to the surface." I managed to sit up, wincing at the sharp pain in my ribs. Water sloshed around my ankles. We were taking on water, but slowly enough that we weren't in immediate danger of sinking. The cabin was in shambles. Equipment torn free during our ascent lay scattered and broken across the floor. Exposed wires sparked occasionally from damaged panels. The smell of burnt plastic and electronics filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the saltiness of seawater. "Everyone sound off," I called, my voice stronger now. "Rachel?" "Here," came a weak response from near the rear bulkhead. Rachel was sitting with her back against the wall, cradling her left arm against her chest. "Think my arm's broken." "Manuel?" "Alive," he groaned from somewhere behind a fallen storage unit. "Got knocked around pretty bad, but nothing's broken." "Brenda?" "I'm okay," Dr. Lee answered, already on her knees beside Javi's stretcher. "Just cuts and bruises." I pulled myself to my feet, ignoring the protest from my battered body, and made my way carefully across the tilting floor to Javi. The makeshift stretcher had come loose during our ascent, and Javi had been thrown against a bulkhead. Brenda had managed to pull him back onto the stretcher, but he looked worse than before. His face was gray, his breathing shallow and irregular. The bandages around his broken leg were soaked through with blood, and fresh blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. I knelt beside him and checked his pulse, weak but present. "Javi," I said, tapping his face gently. "Javi, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, and he let out a soft groan. He was still alive, but barely conscious. "He's lost a lot of blood," Brenda said, her voice clinical despite the worry in her eyes. "The impact must have shifted the bone fragments. I've given him the last of the pain medication, but he needs proper medical attention soon." I nodded, squeezing Javi's shoulder gently before standing up to assess our situation more thoroughly. The Oceanus had taken a beating during our ascent. Multiple hull breaches let in thin streams of water. The control panels were dark except for a few emergency lights. Most of our equipment was damaged or destroyed, but we were alive, and we were on the surface. A sudden beeping drew my attention to the emergency console. 3 green lights had activated on their own. "The emergency locator beacons," Manuel said, limping toward me. "They're automatic. Activate when they detect surface pressure in daylight. They're sending out our distress signal." "Good," I said. "That gives us a chance." I moved to one of the observation windows that wasn't completely cracked or covered in soot. Outside, blue sky stretched above a vast expanse of ocean. The water was calm, small waves lapping gently against our hull. No land was visible in any direction. We could have been anywhere in the Pacific. "Any idea where we are?" I asked Mary. She shook her head. "Navigation systems are completely fried, but the beacons transmit our coordinates. If anyone picks up the signal..." "They will," I said with more confidence than I felt. "The research vessel that deployed us will be looking for us. We've been out of contact for days." I turned back to Brenda, who was checking Javi's vitals again. "What supplies do we have left?" "Medical, water, food." "One emergency medical kit that wasn't destroyed," she replied. "Some water packets, maybe a day's worth for all of us." The food stores were in the section that got torn away. I nodded, trying to calculate how long we could last. The sun beat down on the submersible, heating the metal exterior. Soon the inside would become uncomfortably hot. Between the heat, limited supplies, and Javi's condition, we needed rescue within the next 12 hours. Let's take inventory of what's working and what's not, I told the crew. Mary, check if any communication systems survived. Manuel, see if you can patch the worst of the hull breaches to slow the water intake. Rachel, you and I will sort through the equipment, salvage anything useful. What about the samples? Brenda asked, looking up from Javi. The samples? In the chaos of our escape, I'd nearly forgotten about them. The mineral and water samples we'd collected from that impossible ecosystem beneath the ocean floor. The physical evidence of our discovery. Where are they? I asked. I secured the sample case before the last eruption, Brenda said. It's there, wedged between those two panels. I spotted the reinforced case, miraculously intact, and nodded. We'll make sure they're safe. For the next hour, we worked methodically to stabilize our situation. Manuel used pieces of torn paneling and emergency sealant to patch the worst leaks. Mary confirmed that all communication systems were dead, but the emergency beacons continued to transmit. Rachel and I sorted through the wreckage, salvaging water packets, emergency flares, and a solar blanket that could help keep Javi warm. Brenda stayed with Javi, monitoring his condition and doing what she could with our limited medical supplies. His condition hadn't worsened, but it hadn't improved either. The splint on his leg needed to be redone, and I held him down while Brenda realigned it as best she could. Even in his semi-conscious state, Javi groaned in pain, his body tensing under my hands. Easy, Javi, I murmured. You're going to be okay. When she finished, Brenda sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. The temperature inside the submersible was rising steadily. We need to keep him hydrated, she said, reaching for a water packet. Help me get some water into him. I lifted Javi's head gently while Brenda squeezed small amounts of water between his lips. Most of it dribbled down his chin, but he swallowed some. That's it, she encouraged him. Just a little more. After we'd done what we could for Javi, I moved back to the observation window, scanning the horizon in all directions. The sun was high in the sky now, beating down on the metal hull of the Oceanus, turning the inside into an oven. Sweat soaked through my shirt, and my mouth felt dry despite the water I'd drunk. Hours passed with no sign of rescue. The crew took turns keeping watch at the windows while the others rested in the shade of the few remaining intact sections. We spoke little, conserving energy and water. Javi drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently. It was Rachel who spotted it first. Larry, she called from her position at the starboard window. I think I see something. I scrambled to her side, ignoring the pain in my ribs, and peered through the scratched plexiglass. At first, I saw nothing but blue sky meeting blue water at the distant horizon. Then I spotted it, a dark shape against the sky, too far to make out clearly. Could be a ship, I said cautiously, or it could be nothing. We watched in tense silence as the shape grew larger. After 20 minutes, there was no doubt. It was a vessel, heading directly toward us. It's responding to our distress signal, Manuel said, hope clear in his voice. It has to be. As it drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a research vessel, similar to the one that had deployed us days ago. White hull, equipment on the deck, the silhouette unmistakable. It's the Horizon, Mary said, recognizing our support ship. They found us. Relief swept through me, making my knees weak. I leaned against the wall to steady myself. They found us, I repeated, letting the reality sink in. We were going to be rescued. We were going to survive. Through the scorched, partially melted hull of the Oceanus, I watched as the horizon drew nearer. The research vessel slowed as it approached, and soon I could make out figures moving on the deck. A small craft was being lowered into the water, a rescue boat coming to retrieve us. "Okay, listen up," I said, turning to my crew. "We need to get ready for evacuation. Javi is first priority. Brenda, you'll go with him to continue medical care. Rachel, you'll be next with that broken arm. Then Manuel, Mary, and I'll be last." "What about the samples?" Brenda asked again. "I'll make sure they're secured," I promised. "Those samples are our proof. Without them, no one will believe what we found down there." I moved to the sample case and checked it was properly sealed. Inside were the mineral specimens with their strange blue-green crystals, vials of water from the underground lake, and even a small scraping of the bioluminescent organisms that had lined the cavern ceiling. Not much, but enough to prove we'd discovered something extraordinary. The rescue boat reached us within minutes. I heard voices outside and the clang of metal as they secured their boat to our hull. Then came a pounding on our hatch. "Is anyone alive in there?" a muffled voice called. "Yes," Mary shouted back. "5 survivors, 1 critical." There was a pause, then, "Stand clear of the hatch. We're coming in." We moved back as the emergency hatch was forced open from the outside. Sunlight and fresh air poured in, along with the face of a rescue worker in a bright orange suit. "We need medical evacuation immediately," I said before he could speak. "1 crew member with a compound fracture and significant blood loss, another with a broken arm." The rescue worker nodded and spoke into a radio attached to his shoulder. Within moments, more rescue personnel entered our battered submersible, bringing medical equipment and stretchers. 2 medics went straight to Javi, assessing his condition and starting an IV. Others checked the rest of us, noting our injuries and helping us prepare to transfer to the rescue boat. "How did you find us?" Mary asked one of the rescue workers as he bandaged a cut on her forehead. "Your emergency beacons," he replied. "We've been searching for days after you missed your scheduled check-ins. The horizon was about 50 miles away when your signal appeared out of nowhere." The medics carefully transferred Javi to a proper stretcher, securing his broken leg and attaching monitoring equipment. They lifted him through the hatch with practiced efficiency, followed by Brenda, who refused to leave his side. Rachel went next, wincing as they helped her through the narrow opening. Then Manuel, limping but moving under his own power. Mary hesitated at the hatch, looking back at me. "Go," I told her. "I'll be right behind you." She nodded and climbed through, assisted by one of the rescue workers. I grabbed the sample case and did a final sweep of the submersible, making sure we hadn't left anything crucial behind. Water was now up to my knees. The patches Manuel had applied were failing, and the Oceanus was slowly filling. "Sir, we need to go now," the last rescue worker urged. "This vessel isn't stable." I nodded, taking one last look around the Oceanus, the craft that had carried us to the deepest part of the ocean and back, through impossible caverns and ancient seas. Despite its battered state, it had kept us alive through it all. "I'm ready," I said, handing the sample case to the rescue worker before following him up through the hatch. Outside, the sun was blinding after the dim interior of the submersible. The rescue boat waited alongside, my crew already aboard. Beyond it, the horizon loomed large, its deck busy with activity. Above, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, the medical evacuation for Javi. I was helped into the rescue boat, and we immediately pushed off from the Oceanus. The helicopter descended toward the horizon's deck, where Javi was being prepared for transfer. As our boat pulled away, I kept my eyes on the Oceanus. The submersible was noticeably lower in the water now, its hull breaches taking on more water without our emergency patches to slow the process. Part of me wanted to try to save it, to have it towed back to shore for study, but I knew it was too damaged to salvage. The rescue boat's engine roared as we sped toward the horizon. I clutched the sample case to my chest, unwilling to let it out of my sight even for a moment. Those samples were all we had to prove what we'd discovered. I watched as the helicopter touched down on the Horizon's deck. Medical personnel rushed forward with Javi's stretcher, loading him into the aircraft. Brenda climbed in after him, still refusing to leave his side. The helicopter lifted off as we reached the horizon, rising quickly into the sky and banking toward the mainland. I hoped it would be fast enough for Javi. A ladder was lowered from the horizon, and the rescue workers helped us climb aboard one by one. I insisted on being last, watching as Rachel and then Manuel were assisted onto the deck. Mary went next, pausing at the top to look back at me. I nodded to reassure her and began my own climb, the sample case secured across my back. As I reached the halfway point of the ladder, I heard a loud groan of metal from behind me. I turned to see the Oceanus listing heavily to one side, water now washing over its top hull. The damage was too extensive, and the submersible had finally reached its breaking point. I continued climbing, faster now, and reached the deck of the Horizon just as the Oceanus gave a final shudder. Its nose dipped beneath the waves, and then, with surprising speed, the rest followed. Within seconds, only bubbles remained where our submersible had been, carrying the physical vessel of our discovery into the abyss below. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and old flowers. 3 weeks had passed since the Horizon pulled us from the water, and my body still ached in places I didn't know could hurt. The doctors said I was lucky. 4 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and enough bruises to make my entire torso look like a bad watercolor painting. But I knew the real damage wasn't physical. I stared at the ceiling, counting the little holes in each acoustic tile. It was better than closing my eyes. Every time I did, I saw that cavern again. The bioluminescent ceiling, the prehistoric creatures that shouldn't exist, the impossible underground ocean 7 miles beneath the seafloor. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Hey, boss." Mary stood in the doorway, her arm in a sling. She looked better than when I'd last seen her. The swelling around her eye had gone down, leaving just a yellowish bruise. "Brought you some real food." She placed a paper bag on the tray beside my bed. The smell of actual coffee made my mouth water after weeks of whatever brown water the hospital called coffee. "The doctors say I can leave tomorrow," I said, reaching for the cup. Mary nodded and took the chair beside the bed. "That's good. The debriefings start next week." Debriefings? That's what they're calling them now. Official terminology from our friends at the Office of Naval Research. She lowered her voice. "They've been all over this since we got back. Classified everything. Had us sign so many non-disclosure agreements I've got carpal tunnel." I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "They can't just bury this, Mary. We found something impossible. Something that changes everything we know about." "They already are burying it." She cut me off with a quick glance at the door. "We're not supposed to discuss any of it. Not with each other, not with anyone. Government orders." "That's ridiculous. We were all there. And according to the official story, we hallucinated most of it due to oxygen deprivation after an equipment malfunction." Mary's face hardened. "That's the story we're supposed to stick to." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the frustration rise. When I opened them again, Manuel was standing in the doorway. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Just discussing our mass hallucination," I replied. Manuel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The cut on his scalp had healed, but he moved carefully, favoring his right side. "Ah, yes. Our shared delusion of an underground ecosystem that shouldn't exist. He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How's your recovery going?" I asked. "Better than yours, it seems. Doctors cleared me last week." He sat on the edge of the windowsill. "Brenda's coming up later. She wanted to check on you." "And Javi?" I asked. The question had been weighing on me since we'd been separated at the hospital. Mary and Manuel exchanged looks. "He survived," Mary said carefully. 3 surgeries on his leg. They almost had to amputate, but he pulled through. He's looking at months of rehabilitation." Relief washed through me. In the chaos of the rescue and the aftermath, I hadn't been sure if he'd made it. "Have either of you seen him?" "Once," Manuel said. "He's in a specialized facility in San Diego. Different security clearance there." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "What about our samples?" I asked. "The specimens Brenda collected?" Mary's face told me everything before she spoke. "Gone. They took everything the minute we reached the horizon. Every container, every piece of equipment, even our personal notes and phones. They can't just—" "They did," Manuel cut in. "National security," they said, like some underwater cave with prehistoric fish is going to threaten America. I leaned back against the pillows, trying to process this. Everything we'd discovered, everything we'd risked our lives for, just taken and classified. "Has anyone talked to Rachel, Dr. Sullivan?" I asked. "She's been in meetings with government scientists for the past week," Mary said. "Some kind of consultant role, I think. She's got more academic clout than the rest of us." The conversation paused as a nurse came in to check my vitals. We switched to talking about the weather until she left. "I should get going," Manuel said, standing up. "They've got us on tight schedules, probably tracking our movements." He tried to make it sound like a joke, but none of us laughed. After he left, Mary stayed a while longer. We talked about nothing important, both aware of the possibility of being monitored. When she finally said goodbye, she squeezed my hand a little too hard, her way of saying there was more we couldn't discuss openly. Alone again, I reached for the stack of scientific journals that had accumulated on my bedside table. Reading was the only thing that kept me sane in this place. I flipped through the latest issue of Oceanographic Review, pausing when I spotted an article about deep-sea exploration. My stomach turned as I read through it. The article referenced our expedition as a cautionary tale of equipment failure in extreme environments. It described how oxygen deprivation and extreme pressure can cause vivid hallucinations among even experienced researchers. I threw the journal across the room, where it hit the wall with an unsatisfying thud. 2 days later, after being discharged, I sat in my apartment staring at the walls. The doctors had recommended a therapist to help me process the trauma and separate reality from the hallucinations. I hadn't called the number. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Brenda Lee standing there with a plant. "Housewarming gift," she said with a small smile. "Though I guess you're not exactly moving in." "Thanks," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "How are you doing?" "Better. Back at the university, but on administrative leave." She placed the plant on my coffee table. "They say I need time to readjust." I understood what she meant. They wanted time to make sure she stuck to the official story. "Have you seen the articles?" I asked. She nodded, her expression tightening. "They're calling us delusional, saying we suffered from some kind of mass psychosis." She lowered her voice. "But we both know what we saw down there." "And we have no proof," I said bitterly. "They took everything." "Not everything." Her eyes met mine briefly before looking away. "Rachel wanted me to tell you she'll be stopping by later. Said she has some paperwork for you to sign." The emphasis she put on paperwork made me pause. I nodded slowly. "I'll be here." After Brenda left, I spent hours trying to write down everything I remembered from our time beneath the ocean floor. The bioluminescent organisms, the prehistoric fish, the underground lake, every detail I could recall. But without evidence, it was just the ramblings of a traumatized researcher. Rachel arrived just after sunset, carrying a folder and looking exhausted. Her arm was out of its cast, but she still moved it gingerly. "Good to see you up and about," she said after I let her in. "Barely. Still get tired walking to the kitchen." I gestured to the couch. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water, thanks." When I returned with 2 glasses, she had spread several papers across my coffee table. "These are the official statements they want us to sign," she explained, loud enough for anyone who might be listening. Then she slid a note across the table. "Bathroom. Run water." I nodded and gathered the papers. "Let me look these over in better light." In the bathroom, I turned on the shower and the sink faucet. Rachel joined me, closing the door. "They might have your place bugged," she whispered. "Can't be too careful." "This is insane, Rachel. We're scientists, not spies. We found something they don't want people to know about." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial. Inside was a tiny amount of cloudy water. "I managed to hide this in my boot during the rescue. It's not much, but..." I took the vial carefully, holding it up to the light. "Is this water from the underground lake, with microscopic organisms that haven't changed in millions of years?" Her eyes were intense. "It's proof, Larry. Not much, but it's something they don't know we have." My hands shook slightly as I examined the vial. "They'll come after us if they find out. That's why we need to be smart about this. Document everything, but keep it hidden. Multiple copies, different locations." She paused. "The world isn't ready for what we found. Not yet. But someday." I nodded, understanding. "Someday we'll need to prove we weren't crazy." We spent the next hour in my living room, pretending to review the official documents while passing notes about what we remembered. Rachel had been keeping detailed notes of her own, reconstructing our discovery piece by piece. After she left, I sat by my window looking out at the distant shimmer of the ocean. The same ocean that had nearly killed us, that had swallowed the Oceanus, and all the evidence of what we'd found. Somewhere down there, miles below the surface and miles below the seafloor, was a world that shouldn't exist, a world of ancient creatures and impossible ecosystems. The vial sat heavy in my pocket, a tiny sample, barely visible to the naked eye, but containing organisms unchanged for millions of years. The only physical proof we had. I knew what I needed to do. I would document everything, every detail, every moment of our journey. I would record it all while it was still fresh in my mind, create multiple copies, hide them where they couldn't be found, and I would wait for the right moment. The ocean stretched out before me, calm and ordinary from my window. But I knew better now. I knew what ancient wonders lay beneath that surface. The world might not be ready for the truth, but I felt certain that someday it would surface, just as we had from the depths.